That's okay. All right. Well, welcome to our Unchaining Modern Slavery webinar. We're really pleased that you've joined us, and we trust that our content today will be current, relevant, and helpful to you. I'm Dr. Stephen Morse, founder at Unchained Solutions. Unchained inspires Australian organisations to be leaders in making an impact on modern slavery. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country, recognising that people are joining us from many parts, even outside Australia. And today I'm speaking from Gadigal country. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Unchained acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. And we pay our respect to the elders who are past, present, and extend all that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Well, Unchained hosts these webinars with a view to advancing the conversation on the issue of modern slavery. And it's been, we've been going now for quite some time. And each month we have a different speaker who brings a different perspective on this issue. People from academia, people from NGOs, people from the private sector. And it's really interesting to see the way that different organizations are approaching this, recognizing that if we're going to end modern slavery, combat modern slavery, eliminate modern slavery, whatever your aspiration is for this issue, that it's a partnership. It needs to be collaborative. And so Unchained welcomes partnerships, and we welcome the opportunity to collaborate. And today's webinar really is an expression of collaboration because Unchained Solutions partners with Trace SCI and other channel partners to work together to assist companies and different organizations as they look to address modern slavery through the Modern Slavery Act. Our purpose really is to help you to go deeper in your implementation of the Commonwealth Act, and in our words, to find ways to lead beyond compliance, to go beyond process, and to really find pathways, avenues, not just to solve a problem, but really to look for the opportunities to bring about real responsible business practices. So today's webinar is going to be more interactive than usual. It's going to be more of a conversation with more opportunities for you to ask questions and respond to what we're talking about, more like a workshop. And we've done that because we want to demonstrate a process around assessing risk and to revisit this area, which is really a very common step for many organizations. How do we assess risk, analyze risk in our supply chains and operations, and how do we maximize our impact and make the most of the opportunities there? So we do welcome you if you like to put your questions in a chat. There's a way of starting, and then we can pick them up and just generate a conversation. So in time, we will bring everyone to, in a sense, to the table to visualize you. But we'll just probably start with a bit of conversation and then move forward. Today, I have joining us again, Stephen Early, who's the founder of Trace SCI, a consultancy similar to Unchained based in Sydney. And he's back this year so we can run through what it means to assess modern slavery risks in a way that moves beyond the high level approaches that many companies take, and to think what does it mean to actually go beyond the data, or to make sense of the data and to use it more effectively. Trace SCI and Unchained work in partnership with a number of clients as our services complement each other and really give a more comprehensive solution to help companies monitor and report on modern slavery risks. So Stephen, it's my pleasure to have you here with us.
Good morning. Oh, good afternoon, actually.
Good afternoon. It is good
afternoon
here in Sydney. It's a sunny day. It's great to have you back, Stephen. Just I suppose just to refresh us, for those who weren't here to hear you speak last year, maybe if you just introduce yourself and give a little bit of information about your story and how it is that you've come to put together this entity called Trace SCI. Sorry, not SCI.
No problem. Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate that introduction. Yes, I've spent 20 plus years, probably a lot more, but we'll just keep it 20 for the moment, involved in product and supply chain development across several countries, cultures, and industries. So during that time, during this journey, it became apparent to me that the supply of and consistency and quality of delivery, best margins were achieved when we were engaged and communicating with the actual initial source of the product. So recognizing this approach has had multiple benefits to the businesses I've been involved with. which has prompted me to offer this service through Trace Supply Chain Intelligence to organizations. Interestingly enough, when we started this journey, a lot of what's covered in the modern slavery and things like that were, it's almost given it a name. It was kind of best practice. We recognized that if you didn't know your supply chain and you weren't engaged with them and you didn't recognize what was happening on the production floors, those things would manifest themselves at point of sale or via returns from clients and things like that. So it was always a part of our DNA. So the laws to be came along and gave it a name, and now that's what we're doing.
Perfect, great. Look, I've just had some feedback, Stephen. Someone said they can't hear you. I'm not sure which Stephen they're referring to, if that's Stephen me or Stephen Early. There's just something limiting about, yeah, so.
Is that from my side? Or
I can hear you perfectly, but someone's struggling to hear you. So I can hear you perfectly. It's just that someone struggling to hear you. So yeah, hopefully that will shift and pick up. Yeah, and change. So I can't discern anything from my end. Anyway, we'll press on. Yeah, well, Stephen, yeah, you've got obviously an extensive background, and one of the things that I value about working with you is the experience you have on the ground in the manufacturing process, and so you have real experience across different jurisdictions, different industries, and understand what do things actually really look like on the ground. Which
the challenges that suppliers face.
Exactly, the challenges they face, the conditions that people work under, and really, you can see, a lot of the low-hanging fruit, that things that can be just really fixed very quickly, and in terms of remedies. But also, you also see things at a systemic level, at a more senior level as well. So you can see changes that need to happen on the grassroots, but also what can be seen at a more organizational governance level, which is a great gift to have in this space.
Yeah. Interestingly, the upside of recognizing and having contact with your supply chains, there's probably a couple of ways of approaching this. There's the process in which some companies engage suppliers, which is an algorithmic approach. Whereas what we recognize is the benefits to engaging your actual supply chain are multifaceted. So I think, having spent a lot of time on factory floors and production floors and backward integrating into the supply chain across different industries, is what we recognize is the challenges that potentially manifest themselves, as I referred to earlier on. However, the costs of improving these outcomes at grassroots is quite low cost to the suppliers, low cost, which ultimately low cost to the consumer as well. Because as you referenced, the low hanging fruits, it's the simple things like the environment in which people are working, the tools in which, maybe the chairs in which they're sitting, the light in which they've provided to the working environment, little things like sanitation, things like that. These are the sorts of things that can impact on a product's outcome. Quite often we do walkthroughs of factories and things like that, and we'd identify things, and we'd just make a reference saying, I'm going to be back here in X number of months or X number of times. I think it would be a benefit if we address the following, which I noticed today. And quite often it just becomes business as usual for many suppliers and many factories, where they kind of start to see that that's the norm and that the people are used to it, therefore it doesn't really impact them. But I have seen firsthand the impact of clean working environments, well-lit areas, areas where the infrastructure or even the decor, painting hallways, taking weeds out of a flower bed and putting flowers there, that the people on the production floors recognize that, oh, okay, the boss is actually doing something about us. He doesn't see us just as a tool that can be discarded as and when. He's creating a better environment for us. And we've mapped productivities, reject levels, et cetera, and just with the small changes like that I've just mentioned, the outcomes are quite stark insofar as with an upside.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that just raises the whole question about remedies, and remedy is really about dignity. Really, it's about restoring dignity. And I mentioned this yesterday at another event. That if we want to restore dignity, we can. There's lots of practical ways. We need to demonstrate that practically, and it doesn't have to be this big scary thing. It can really be. Really about just it's the little things really that really affect people on a day-to-day basis. That can really really demonstrate that you care about these people, that they're not just numbers, not just people at a workstation, that they're actually they're contributors to this enterprise. That they're empowered to actually be part of this this great endeavor, the development of these products or this company. So there's a lot to be said for that, and in a sense to get into this mindset of continuous improvement, thinking, well, what can we do today to make this place an enjoyable place for everybody to be part of. So these are part of the opportunities.
And businesses recognize that, with these small changes, that they bear the fruit with regards to better margins and things like that. And then that gives the opportunity to open the door to, with regards to remuneration, et cetera, working hours that are required, upgrading of quality, and then obviously with the growth that's associated with that, because businesses are not looking at like jumping ship every time something gets a little bit difficult. If you're engaged with your supply chain, and this brings us back full circle back to the different approaches that companies have. So if you approach your supply chain with regards to an algorithmic, okay, we just want to touch base, we want to tick all the boxes on a modern slavery position statement. Our industry says there's X number of slaves per 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 degrees of your into your supply chain. However, that's all fine and well for the big glossy brochures. However, that's not going to manifest itself in the product and and quality and integrity and the margins that you want to achieve with a consistent supply chain.
Let's just go there then. I mean, today we're looking at different approaches, and look, over the past couple of years, and I'm sure this has been adopted. This kind of approach has been adopted from other types of risk management, and also from what entities have been doing. For example, say in the United Kingdom with the Modern Slavery Act, which is an older piece of legislation. So one of the traditional approaches, and I don't want to sort of negate really what's been done here, but a lot of companies really, and this to lay the foundation, and this is not a wrong foundation, but a lot of companies have taken steps to lay a foundation and to assess modern slavery risks. And how they've done that is that they've integrated a number of key and reliable international databases, data sets, and used through, as Stephen's mentioned, algorithmic or an algorithm really to work out where the risks are. High, medium, or low. Now, there's a lot that can be said for these, these data sets, but there's also obviously limitations around them in terms of, some of them can be quite historic. It could, or depends on the framework. If you, for example, just sit with a figure that there are only 40 million slaves in the world, and that's the basis upon which you're going to assess risk, then your results are going to be skewed. So and that one of the tensions that we have with all the data is that it's an issue. Modern slavery is an issue hidden in plain sight. We really don't know how many people are in slavery, and so whilst we can get an indication and a very high level prescriptive view, we can't settle for that. And I think that's what we're saying here today, that we can't just settle with that. It's a great foundation to think, okay, in terms of segmenting, okay, well, what do I need to focus on next? Okay, where are the areas of high risk? And then let's start there. So it's a way of actually organizing data, segmenting, and then being strategic in terms of how do I allocate resources, financial, people, and tools to go further, but we can't stop there. So that's kind of really what we want to say today, is that it's a foundation. And that's probably one of the main, limitations of it, is that it is a foundation. And we're here today to say companies need to go further, and there's great benefits to actually going further than just sitting with an algorithm, which actually is going to be not really give you a complete picture of actually what's going on.
Interesting point with you raised there with regards to the algorithmic approach is it doesn't give you any actionable outcomes. In other words, there's no provides no call to action relevant to the actual supply chain. And interestingly enough, if you're applying an algorithmic approach to your position statement, in essence, you're missing the opportunity to improve and make your compliance actually a profit center for your business as opposed to a cost center. And I'll explain a little bit further. So as a supplier, if you say, okay, this is where our risks lie. However, you actually haven't mapped your supply chain. You'll know from our past researchers and working together, Stephen, that a lot of companies recognize that their supply chain is that person or company that's invoicing them. However, that's not their supply chain. Their supply chain is much deeper than that. It might be, in some cases, we've discovered 2, 3, 4 degrees of separation before you're actually at the product source for which you're getting delivered. So there in itself is having an algorithmic approach to it, is you're not actually identifying where the potential layers in your supply chain are that may or may not be adding value to your business. In the event that you have a quality issue, you obviously go back to your supplier. Your supplier might give you your money back or a portion of your money back. However, that doesn't negate the fact that you've spent a lot of development costs and product and time and energy into developing a product for you to reap a benefit from that margin. So having a refund is not going to add to your income or your EBIT going forward. So that's one thing, that knowing what your supply chain, who actually is your supply chain, engaging your supply chain is so critical. I've worked in companies where we've gone in, we've mapped the supply chain, we've identified maybe 2 layers in the supply chain, and immediately just having the conversation with the incumbent suppliers, we've identified between 10 and 25% margin differences that are available purely and simply by actually going into the supply chain and engaging with the sources per se. That doesn't mean that the existing incumbent suppliers get thrown out. However, what it does make sure is that all your contributors in the supply chain are working in a lean fashion, and they're actually contributing to the finished product. So that's another thing. So and a lot of companies say, well, that's not our KPIs to know about our supply chain. Our KPI might be providing a service or selling a product, etc. Completely respect that. However, if you're informing your supply chain that you know what the supply chain looks like, you're at least in a position to actually negotiate or alternatively find an alternative source of supply. Because it's more than just your supply chain. You might think that those 3 or 4 suppliers, you have a divergent supply chain. Therefore, if one falls over, the other 2, 3, or 4 can pick up the slack. In some cases, it's all converging back to one potential source and or one potential region. So if you have a disruption to that region for any point, for any period of time, or that source, your complete product range could fall over.
So it seems what you're saying then is that, yes, it is an investment. It's an investment in working out and discovering who your suppliers are and what is the real picture of your supply chain. But actually, the benefits could actually then come back to you, is that you can identify where you might be losing money in that process, and particularly if you attach this idea to quality. We don't compromise on quality. So how can we, in a sense, bring those two together to actually make sure that the products that we have are of the best quality, but also are of the best quality when it comes to who's actually putting these products together, and what are the conditions upon which they're working.
Yes, absolutely. And the flip side of that is also the convergence. So that you're also mitigating your risk if you actually know your supply chain, because you might be quite comfortable with the margins that you're achieving, and that might not be your primary objective, which it should. Ordinarily, it isn't, but it's a symbiotic outcome insofar as knowing what your supply chain is, which is a modern slavery position requirement, engaging with your suppliers. In other words, if you wish you might have a process, etc., or something that you would like to change. However, unless you're talking to the proximate source of the product or the outcome, then your desires or your endeavors may be watered down or may not suit the intermediaries, because it'll reveal to them or reveal to you that they may not know as much about the product or the scope of services or the scope of products that you should be getting.
Yeah.
And all this leads, these things feed into so many things around modern slavery, environmental, social governance, et cetera. So all of this data that we capture at grassroots is basically laying the foundations to a skyscraper. So we look at this as like the concrete and the rebars into all your other endeavors with regards to your environmental, social governance, corporate social responsibility, sustainable development goals, product integrity, continuity of supply, and the list goes on and on and on.
Sure. Well, look, let's move then to the solution that Trace provides, that we support you in, and how this might compare to an algorithmic approach.
Yeah.
I'm just going to share my screen and just move. First of all, these are the stages as you see them. Stephen, do you want to just touch?
Yep. So as we said earlier on, visibility around your supply chain, which is a position statement requirement. And it also gives you an idea of what your supply chain looks like. As we mentioned earlier, your local supplier might not be the supplier. The traceability is identifying who they are, where they are. So then that gives you a geographical snapshot of your supply chain. It might be the fact that you have a local company that supplies you. However, they're dealing with a trading company in maybe Hong Kong, and then that trading company is dealing with somebody out of Shanghai, and then ultimately that trading company might be working with a factory in Xi'an or somewhere like that within China. So therefore, just understanding that, then you'll identify there's 2, 3, 4 degrees of separation between you and the source. So bearing that in mind, then that's when you can start to, when you get to the source, that's when you can start to implement your quality management outcomes or identify the margin differences. So that being aware of that, okay, and then identifying where those sources are, then that gives you the opportunity to segue into potentially paralleling alternative sources of supply in that region. So that's what it comes back to. That's sort of the foundations of where we start to look at. And then from there, the modern slavery turnkey solution is what we do is we reach out to your supply chain using our SaaS platform. So we will identify the questions that will establish the foundations to your supply chain, and we'll ask for information that will give you leverage. It'll identify potential number of workers in a supply chain, which will then also give you an idea of the capacity of a factory. So quite often we see factories, they say, okay, they're supplying 1 million units per annum. However, when we do the supply chain mapping, we identify that there's only 20 workers in that factory. So that actual source of your supply per se is not actually the source. And then that means that it's being subcontracted, which again has the potential of substandard quality, inconsistent quality, etc. Especially if you're looking at a product that's an ongoing product, you want to ensure the continuity of product and workmanship, raw materials, etc. So that's where our turnkey solution comes in.
Yeah, I just want to touch base on that. So you mentioned SAQ, so that would be a self-assessment questionnaire process. Look, how does your solution, turnkey solution, then how does it differ to say a more received or accepted way of doing it? Because in my experience, different entities have had various degrees of success or non-success when it comes to issuing SAQ. In order to, they've laid out their supply chain and an assessment of severe risks, and then the next step is that they've issued an SAQ to suppliers with various percentage rates around what they get back and the quality of those questionnaires. How does your solution differ from that process?
Well, we have a two-tier approach. So first of all, we're understanding mapping your supply chain is pretty much your identifying your product categories, etc. So what we do is we'd have a slice of that, and we'd look at your volumes that you're doing with the supplier and the dollar spend that you've got. So then we'd break that down into the different categories across your business. Because the important thing is with an SAQ is you might have 500 suppliers. But if you've only been dealing with 5 of them on a consistent basis for any period of time, or even more recently, they're likely to be the only 5 that ever respond to you. So it's important to identify who your supply chain is, are they active, and do you have leverage on their response? Mm-hmm. The other thing is to give them a sense of comfort insofar as you're not looking to circumvent them per se. However, for you to better understand them, you need to do that deep dive into the supply chain. It might be the fact that it's a discovery process for you, where they actually are hiding who their supply chain is, and the potential for longevity for you as a business. The further you are away from the control point, the less control you have it. It's almost like I liken it to like holding a hammer. So if you've got a hammer and it's like the hammer head's this big, but you've got a 6-foot hammer handle, okay, you trying to hammer a nail in or trying to control that on for a finite or for a small object or for a certain outcome, you don't have any control. So the closer you are to the source of the product, of the hammerhead, okay, is where you're going to actually have control, and you're going to get the outcomes that you're looking for.
Sure. So could I, sorry, I'm getting a bit of background noise here. My apologies for all those. My 5-year-old daughter's yelling out. So I think we may be interrupted a little bit. So just want to sort of tease that out. So it's a process where it's kind of like an integrated process. It's a process where there is also potential to work with your direct suppliers to actually get the visibility beyond your direct suppliers. But there's also potential there to work around them should you suspect that they're potentially hiding something as well. So that's a
discovery process. So it's a mutually beneficial discovery process, because quite often if a business model is based on something that's not in perpetuity, in other words, able to consistently provide and build on, then you're basically delaying the inevitable, I would say. Sure. So it's good to know that your supply chain or your partners in the supply chain are adding value. That's a critical point of discovery, that they actually have the relationship with, and that the actual source of your product is actually scalable as well. So it's all fine and well to be receiving a product or a service. However, if there's no consistency in that relationship, or you're not recognized as the end user or end consumer of that service, then again your relationship gets watered down. So your outcomes are watered down, and your business model is not then obviously therefore not sustainable. I see it across businesses on a regular basis, that they don't know who their source of supply is. They'll have a great season or a great sell through on a product, then they'll go, okay, let's repeat that. But because they're not dealing with the actual manufacturer of the product, when it goes back to market, that middleman may say, okay, well, I had an argument with that company, or their production capacity is full, or that mill doesn't work anymore, or that manufacturer doesn't work anymore, so we're going to put it somewhere else. However, you're not privy to that information, because you have no idea of where that product was made. You, in good faith, will place an order. However, the outcome might be 1, 2, 3 months later will be very disparate to what your original consumers was looking for. And that's another thing to consider, is your consumer can start to expect that consistency of product and or service when you have a stable supply chain that you can you're engaging with.
Great. Well, let's move on then to consider how this approach would, say, differ or compare with an algorithmic approach. And I know you've got some other slides. So yeah, just want to walk us through some of these comparisons.
So obviously your high level, which is your algorithmic and the industry and country risk. These are the things that we, from an algorithmic perspective, and also engaging your supply chain is something that we look at, because obviously that's your first port of call. However, that's where the points of difference, that's where it ceases. That's what, so commonality ceases. So with the algorithmic approach, you don't know who the actual players are in. You don't understand this. You will never understand the degrees of separation in your supply chain. And degrees of separation is the layers or the middlemen that are in it. Engaging with the source of supply. With the algorithm, you don't know who your supply chain is. So therefore, you're not able to engage and improve situations or readily understand the challenges that they're facing as well. So you get ahead of the curve. In my previous role, I was engaging with the sources of supply. So quite often we were identifying potential disruptions to supply chain long before it became apparent across the agency base. We'd be 2, 3, 4 months ahead of the curve in some cases. Quite often it would be a case of, oh yeah, the sourcing departments identified the following is coming through, and the natural response is, well, we haven't heard anything from our suppliers, so it's probably not going to happen. 3 months later, what we talked about is manifesting itself and interrupting their supply chain. So then you're able to, obviously, as we discussed earlier, communicate standards with your source of supply and manage the convergence or divergence of supply chain, which is another thing. Is if everything that you manufacture is in 1 square kilometer of a particular country and there's a natural disaster or something there, then your whole product range could potentially be put at risk. So we use it as a convergence and divergence. You might find that you're across 20 different areas and you have no buying power. And that might be another area that you can leverage off by actually knowing what your supply chain is. And then you can implement a parallel risk reduced for your supply chain. In other words, if you do know that you've got that in that country, or you're too single country risk exposed, then you can look for parallel sources of supply in different countries as well. So that's where the visibility comes in. And that's the difference with that algorithm as opposed to a engaged supply chain. And then we go to the traceability. So we're able to identify your location and geographical location of your suppliers. We can engage with those suppliers, and you can implement standards. So interestingly enough, a lot of people say, yeah, but this is going to cost me. I'm going to have to get a QC, or I'm going to have to get like an auditor, et cetera, et cetera. We have channel partners that can provide auditing services across 85 countries, across multiple industries: food, heavy industry, electronics, apparel, footwear, hard goods, soft goods, plastics, etc. So we could provide you a quality auditing service or an inspection service that can be boots on the ground in your factory, verifying your supply chain with 48 hours notice, obviously once we get the frameworks of what your desires and needs are. So this is very directly related to a product. So you don't have a consistent overhead. So the services that we can provide you, knowing your engaged supply chain, is very much relevant to almost like a raw material component of your product. So therefore, you're not sitting with a constant overhead. You've got flexible, dynamic workforce available to you across your whole supply chain. So if you, for instance, had 100 factories across different four or five different countries, and you wanted to have everyone boots on the ground across all of those locations across 2 or 3 days, that we can manage that for you as well. So that's the difference that Trace Supply Chain Intelligence can provide their client base, that differs from the algorithmic approach to it. So it's a much more end-to-end, not identify the issues and then walk away, or point to them and say, here you go, here's a nice glossy brochure, these are your problems, off you go. We can provide you the solutions as well. Obviously, with companies like Unchained Solutions, we amalgamate our strengths and provide a direct related to a purchase order service for companies without the fixed overheads.
Yeah, and I think it's probably true to say too, I think one of the temptations with any risk assessment process, is the quick fix approach, which you can get through the algorithm, very, very fast. We can get you the data, and we can do that. We can get you the data, but what we're looking at here is really quite this is a long-term, and in some sense, a slow burn process, really, isn't it? I mean, to get the level of visibility and traceability is really about it is an investment in time and resources, and in the process, though, is to transform. What I can see here is in the process you'll transform the supply chain, and transform the way you do business and the way that you engage and source products. So it's kind of, on one hand, there is that investment, but it's also a way about, it's also a process whereby in increasing the visibility and the traceability, you will also, it's also a way of getting more control, more
establish a much more robust business model as well.
Process. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out, because I think sometimes, when it comes to, it really comes back to this idea, modern slavery risks and related human rights violations is not a quick fix. It's a very complex issue. And, as has been said by others, modern slavery sits on a continuum. And so, at times it's very difficult to know what we're looking at, and we can't just do that. As Stephen said, through glossy reports, we actually have to, take whatever received data that we can get, but actually go further to make sure that we're actually getting, the visibility, and the transparency, and the traceability that we're looking for.
Yeah, that's where it becomes a profit center, because you're actually controlling the outcome of your business as well.
Well, Stephen, look, we've got a few more slides, but I'm just wondering maybe if we could just open it up. I'm just mindful of the time. It's almost quarter to 2. So I just wanted to perhaps invite the others who've joined us today, if they wanted to come on screen, and to at least ask questions. I can just open let me just open their microphones and see if they've got any questions based on that. So we don't, make it too long a session. I can't find my mouse to do this. Here we go. Here we go. All right.
Hello.
Hello, Warwick. Good to join us.
Solid session. Just taking it all in right now. Can't say I have any questions at the moment, but just taking it all in.
Okay, that's fine. And we've got a Mariah here. Hi, Mariah.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me today. Really appreciate the context, and definitely finding a lot of these problems in my position at Transgrid. Currently my current challenge is trying to hook up our risk matrix with the one we're using on our supplier questionnaire platform, which is Inform 365. It's for the energy businesses. I'm not sure if you heard it. It's like a one-stop shop, so our suppliers don't have to keep filling out a survey. And they measure risk based on geography and industry, but they don't manage past that. So just trying to figure out how much visibility that actually gives us. Yeah.
I think that's where the Inform 365 is a SaaS platform, which we're familiar with. We work with their foundation. However, our approach is beyond the SaaS platform. So a lot of the information that you're garnering from the Inform 365 platform, it's about taking it to that next level. It's about identifying what the responses are, identifying whether your SAQs are garnering information around the workforce per se, their geographical locations. A lot of companies are only looking at their tier 1 suppliers, which is great. That's a first starting point. But it's about what we're doing afterwards once you've got that information. And that's where we Trace Supply Chain Intelligence comes in, and we work with you to identify where your risks are, not only from the first scrape of that information, but more around, is there other suppliers in the supply chain? Because quite often you might get reported that it's a first tier. However, and that's where it stops. What we're doing with Unchained Solution and our clients is we're asking more information. Are you the raw material supplier? Are you the assembly point? What other component suppliers are bringing or adding value to that finished product? And then mapping that and seeing where that goes. Thereafter, that's when we start to take action. We say, okay, fine. So if you marry your output to your potential workforce, is that congruent? Is that within its factories or that supplier's capabilities? So then that will give you an idea about whether you're getting subcontracting is happening in your business. So if you've got subcontracting, again, that comes to be a part of where you're not controlling your supply chain. So therefore, you're not controlling the product outputs or the quality outputs that you're expecting. So because once it arrives here, okay, and it's got to be plugged in, or it's got to be put into the business, or got to be put into your existing infrastructure, if it's not functioning, it can have a mammoth impact on your business, on your profitability, and or your service KPIs or service level agreements, etc. So that's where we're able to provide, if you wanted, we can maintain, assess the integrity of a product before it goes to a manufacturing location. We can audit the product in certain product categories. We can audit and quality assess the product before it gets shipped. So all of these things that we look at to make sure that when your product arrives or the service arrives, that there's no surprises that are there. So, I mean, we'd be happy to have a conversation and sort of identify what information you've got around that and where we can deep dive on your supply chain to address the issues or the risk matrix where you see it fitting. Because, yeah, I'd have to understand your product and your service a bit better to answer that more fully.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariah. Okay. Well, I think we might wrap up there, Stephen. And I'm sure there's much more that we can say, and yeah, a lot more that Stephen is able to share. So I'm just going to share my screen. There it is. So yeah, we just want to thank everyone for joining our webinar workshop today. Yeah, it's been, for me, it's always an insightful experience for me when I'm talking to Stephen, and yeah, seeing the way he thinks about this issue and the kind of services that he provides. So yeah, if you'd like to connect with Stephen, you can. There's his email address, stephen@tracesci.com. And you can go to the website tracesci.com for more information. You can, if you'd like to connect with us at Unchained Solutions, you can do that using the email address there, or you can also scan the QR code, which will take you to all my socials and all the ways you can connect with me, which seems to be evolving day by day. So,
nice little QR code there. Is that two birds kissing in the middle of that thing?
It's.
Or is it a house?
No, it's 3 arrows with an arrow in the middle, I think. So.
Oh, there you go. Oh yes, now I can see it. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. As always, it's a pleasure, and we do hope that our conversations have been relevant to where you're up to in terms of your compliance. If you're with business and you need to comply with the Modern Slavery Act, or perhaps you're a smaller player and not necessarily need to comply fully, but you're also being tapped on the shoulder by a larger entity asking to do something constructive with this issue called modern slavery that you've never heard before. Or perhaps you're a consumer, you're a conscious consumer, an individual who actually wants to do more to make conscious choices. We can speak with you at any level and to an extent to actually point you in the right direction and even point you to other people who might be able to help you further. So yeah, we trust that you've been inspired and encouraged today, and yeah, that you've not just seen, I suppose just the main takeaway for me is that this is not just a problem space. This is also a space where there's opportunity to make real change and to change the way that we do business. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you again. Bye,
you.
everyone. Cheers, Stephen.
Bye.